Hi, and welcome to week 12. This week we're continuing on your opening credits, and I'm going to show you a little bit of stuff in After Effects that can be really beneficial, and that's kind of pushing the boundaries of what we've been making so far. If we go over title sequence and opening credit, tools and inspiration, I found this really cool article that talks about successful things that are in a title sequence and how you can do it in After Effects. They have different templates that you can follow, different things that you can try. Some of these might cost money, some might be free, but I just want you to take a look at the different things and different ways that we can add details in After Effects. We've been looking at it in kind of a more motion graphics standpoint, not as much a video editing, but like even just these little particles or this layer, you can really get some nice depth in After Effects. So take a look at that. I did the title sequence for Monsters Inc. and then 5 great animated title sequences. Then I have this page on green screen. I was going to do my own video on green screen, but the fact of our situation and ability to be able to do this, I figured if you have interest in it, then give it a shot. If you don't, I would still recommend looking at this. It is really amazing what After Effects can do. So I have an article that I would want you to read on green screens. Mainly, green screens used to be the most common. Ink was cheaper in green way back in the day, and green hopefully isn't a major part of your skin tone. Yes, a lot of people have olive skin, but we're not talking sickly green, and that's why it's normally a vibrant green. So you can really put up a sheet in any color, but you need to pay attention because you're using chroma key. So I know more of you are familiar with Photoshop, where I can use my magic wand tool, click on a pixel, and it grabs any pixel in the area that has a similar value as the pixel that you selected. In After Effects, chroma keying kind of does a very similar thing. So when you play your video, you will use an eyedropper and click on a green section. And what it does is it removes everything that's a similar green to your screen. So again, that's why you wouldn't want to wear a green shirt if you're using a green screen. You can get very technical, it can be the exact tint and tone of green, but it's a lot easier if you can just have some contrast. I would say more often nowadays they use blue. Does become a little bit of a challenge with blue jeans, but more industry standard. They're getting more creative and they've got the technology to be able to select things out. So there's a video about green screen keying. It is pretty simple, so if you want to give it a shot but are uncertain, it's not going to be a huge endeavor. You can also grab probably something from the internet, or again, just use a very simple, hang a sheet up and see what you can do with it. The main thing that I put here to pay attention to is lighting. Okay, so you can have the best green screen, it is crisp, it is clean, you've cut it out perfectly, but if your lighting doesn't match, that's when you're going to break the believability. So if I want to put myself on a glorious beach with major sun coming up and casting a very strong shadow, if when I'm doing my green screen I'm just washed out, then you're going to need to try to match it. Now, I said lighting makes keying your green screen more difficult. This is true. That doesn't mean that it's not doable. I would want you to match your lighting as close as possible. I would keep it a little bit more subtle, and then you can add more. In this video, we're going to go over adding lights in After Effects, so you can always do that if you need to bring out anything further. Alright, so now your actual submission for your opening credits. You've already started, you've gotten feedback, now you need to make the actual video. Your final render due Sunday. Just a couple of reminders, 10 to 20 seconds of quality animation. You can add music if you'd like, but it isn't a requirement. If you wanted to use a show's logo or something like that, you need to put a citation in your video You can make your own logo. You don't need to use a logo. I just want to make sure that if you are taking anything, you are citing it. I really would like you to use 100% your own work, but I've had some questions, so just wanted to let you know. Feel free, reach out with any other questions. And then I put an optional discussion board where you can post your projects, give critique to your classmates, anything to keep pushing your project along. So post, give tips, all like that. All right, let's take a look in After Effects. So, I already cheated. I showed you something. This is what you'll see. So I just have an orange solid. I just did right mouse click, new solid, selected the color, and then right mouse click, new text. I did After Effects is the coolest because we know it is. So we haven't done it in a little bit, but don't forget this box is a 3D layer. So if I click and make my text a 3D layer, we can remember that I can now transform and rotate in different directions. Okay. The main thing also, when we make something 3D, we can now view things from a top view. So if I go here, I can click it to 2 views, and now I can see that I have a top view. And here's my text, just moving closer away from the active camera. And we'll talk about cameras in a little bit as well. Okay, so one thing we may not have noticed, maybe you did, when I make this layer 3D, I also have material options. We're going to get back to this in a second, but now I can create a light. So I'm going to right mouse click, new light. Now you have some options here. We have parallel, spot, point, and ambient. You're probably going to use spot for almost everything that you do. A spotlight is going to be, I like to think of it as a flashlight. You're going to get a round highlight. You're going to be able to edit the feather of the cone, the angle of the cone. Point light is light coming from a point in space. So if you wanted it to look like you were doing a lamp, you could put a point light in it. Ambient light is kind of to fill in additional light. So we have what's called direct light, and then we have bounce lighting. So as I'm sitting in my computer right now, I'm by a window and I have my computer. If the sun were shining, which hopefully it will be soon, the sunlight is going to be my direct light. That is a very bright light. It's coming directly at me. Now, if I look on my desk, I have some reflection of light. The sun hit the desk, the sunlight hit the desk, and then the desk is going to cast a little bit of light as well. Same thing with my computer. My computer's casting light, but also my keyboard is reflecting some of that light. So that's where you would use kind of your ambient light. And then parallel is going to kind of be more like that sunlight, just light coming from a direction. I generally don't use parallel because I want you to see the edge of the light. So up to you. You can play around with all of them. We're going to do a spotlight. Color, you can double click and select a color. As we know, most light, all light, is not a perfect white. Generally we have some sort of yellow. Unfortunately in our computer lab we have a lot of yellow, but I'm just going to add a little bit. Intensity you can change as we move along. I would just leave these as the default. Cast shadows, let's turn that puppy on. And we can always edit this too. So then I hit OK. So now you can see, and this is why it's kind of important to have your top view, because we can see how far away the light is from the text. You can see that cone angle, and we can see what the light's actually doing. So I can animate this light to give a really cool effect, because this light is going to be animatable just like everything that we've talked about. If I twirl down here, you can see I've got a little bit of different options, but they're very similar to what we're used to. So our point of interest versus our position. Can you see the difference? The point of interest is where our camera, or our light, I'm sorry, is shining. It's this kind of target, whereas the position is the actual light. I kind of think of this as, you know, back in the day with the huge cameras that you'd put on your shoulder, you as the camera operator, it did have a zoom on it, but it wasn't quite as good. So you would have to move forward and back and side to side, but then you could also just move the camera without having to move your whole body, however you like to think of it. But the cool thing is we can parent. So if we see this point of interest right here, I can pick whip, remember our parenting, and I can parent this to something. This has an error right now. Don't worry about that. I haven't actually animated anything or done anything. But if I had my text moving, I could have the light animated to follow it. So again, our point of interest is that target on the end of the light. Our position is where the actual light is located. Orientation, rotation, as we're used to. Now your light options, this is where we can kind of go back to that options that we looked at before. Intensity of the light, cone angle, how wide do you want that circle to be? Cone feather, how much of a fall off, do you want it to have? Radius, we're going to leave those the same, fall off distance. But again, all having to do with how the light is going to be affected. Now, Jen, we talked about shadows, but I'm not seeing any shadows. Well, that's when we have to go back to our text. So I'm clicking on my text and I have this material options. Cast shadows is turned off, so I will turn it on. And of course, now there's nothing for it to cast a shadow on. So give me 1 second and I will fix that. Accept shadows, accepts light, ambient, diffuse. You can adjust the shine. All of this is kind of trying to get you to get the look that you want. You know, if something is matte, it's not gonna give as much of a reflection as if it is glossy. So that's what all of these effects are doing here. All right, so let's import. Good old day to night. There we go. Sorry, I had to turn on the 3D for it. So you can see, and I'm just going to go back to one view. See the shadow that we're casting on our letters here? And they're going to cast because this is the center of our highlight, so they're going out, and our light is affecting everything that is below it. Okay? If you didn't want it to cast, let's say on the day to night, then you'd want to make the spotlight and the After Effects. Remember, we can pre-compose. So light and text. And now you can see that my light is just affecting the text and it's not affecting my day to night image. Okay, so this is a cool way to show a glow. You know, a lot of like ritzy kind of motion graphics get that like light moving across the text and then maybe a little ting with a highlight. So you can play around with stuff like that. Now, just as we added a light, we can also add a camera. This is something that I would recommend that you kind of look at and play around with. That being said, I don't use cameras too often because technically this is our active camera. So we have a camera kind of set up for our view. Some examples when I may use a camera would be if I wanted to kind of fly into the scene. You could do it with zoom, you know, scale. But sometimes it's nicer to do it with a camera, especially if you had particle effects or layers that you want to look like it's coming by. You could use a camera. Again, You could use other tools that we've gone over. There's always more than one way to do something, but just so you are aware of what we can do, right mouse click, new, camera. Now, two-node camera is what we were working with kind of with our light. We have the camera that would sit on your shoulder and the target. If you just wanted to do the camera on your shoulder without a target, you would just always rotate this. You could do a one-node camera. Kind of think of a two-node camera. If I held a string and threw you a tennis ball on the other side of the string and we held, you held the tennis ball and I held the end of the string, anywhere that you moved, I would have to kind of navigate towards you, but I could also still kind of navigate and move myself separately. If that made it more confusing, I apologize. You can let me know if you want more clarification. 55 millimeter, they try to make it as realistic as possible. Okay, now we are looking at our active camera right now. So I want to click camera 1. This will match whatever your camera is that you just created. It doesn't look any different to start with because they're just creating it to the view that you already had. I'm going to look at two views though. All of my work is right here kind of overlapping. And then this is my camera. So for instance, I can move my camera. I can also twirl down here and transform. So point of interest, you can see it looks like I'm just kind of rotating the image, but I'm moving my camera. Well, my camera target. Here's moving my camera. So I'm getting some interesting effects here. Camera options, you can always adjust depth of field. For those of you that are really interested in photography, there's some nice options here. Okay, so that's something where you can play around with. Again, if we wanted to have it like zoom in, oops, let me make sure I'm doing the right direction here. There we go. So we could zoom in and you'll see eventually I will pass through my image. All right, so I simplified things a little bit. I got rid of my day to night layer. I've got my camera and my spotlight, the text, and the solid here. So I did want you to be aware that After Effects has a small plugin with Cinema 4D. For those of you that are interested in 3D, Cinema 4D is I want to say simplified. That does not mean that it's easy, but 3D program. And it works well with After Effects. So, you can create almost anything in Cinema 4D and bring it into After Effects. So if I wanted to bring in a coffee mug and have it do a 360 and it would actually be a three-dimensional model that I'm bringing into After Effects. So you can always go to New and then Cinema 4D file, just like we could do a Photoshop file, content aware, etc. You can do that, and I'll let you kind of do some research on your own with that. The one thing that they do is allow us to kind of make our text beveled. So if I look at my text layer, I'm going to twirl these up, you'll see when I'm in the 3D mode, I have geometry options, and then I can click Change Renderer. Classic 3D is what we normally work in. Cinema 4D, and there are a lot of options you can do. This will be more taxing on your computer, so make sure you save before you do this, but you can adjust the kind of quality and resolution in your render. But I'm going to hit OK just to show you guys. Back to my one view so we can see. So I can then add a bevel. So you may be like, this really isn't changing all that much, but it actually is. So I can adjust the bevel depth, I can adjust the hole depth, and the extrusion depth. Then the interesting thing to kind of show it off even further is when we rotate. So now you can see that the text actually has depth to it. Again, it is going to be a little bit taxing. You can see that it kind of freezes and then pops in, but a cool way, if you have any interest in adding a little bit of 3D to your files, a fun way that you can do it. All right, so if you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out. I look forward to seeing some title sequences, opening credits, and let me know again if you need anything. Hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.